So I started at G2 a little bit after my 29th birthday in the CMO role. And so what was really interesting was that I was the happiest that I've ever been. I'd got my dream job. I got it by like the goal I wanted to get there. I wanted to get to the C-suite by 30. And then within about a month of getting the job, I just started to feel like, what's the word? I started to kind of just feel that itch that I had felt before that kept me like pushing and moving on up.
What would you say is your leadership style now that we've talked about your hiring style and, the structure of your team? Like, what is your leadership style and how has that played into the success of your team, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually been something that I've been thinking a lot more about lately because I've been reading a lot more. Like I love Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I feel like, some excerpts from that have been going around in high rotation lately around kind of wartime CEO
Yeah.
versus peacetime CEO. And it kind of got me thinking about like, am I a wartime CMO or a peacetime CMO? And I'm not totally sure. I mean, I think with everything that went down, it definitely took me a lot longer to start to work out what to do for us as a marketing team than I would have liked. I really felt kind of stunned by everything that was happening with Corona and just trying to think through sort of like the revenue implications of everything, and definitely took me longer to get going than I would have liked. So I feel like right now I'm functioning well as a wartime CMO, if we call myself that. But early on, like it took me a while to really kind of like get my mojo, essentially. I really felt like I was without mojo for the first month or so of COVID-19. So anyway, I just kind of share that as a bit of context. I'd say like more like longer term though. I mean, what's maybe interesting to know about me is I'm an Enneagram type at my core, which means I'm a challenger. And I kind of like swing to 7, which is the enthusiast. So I'm like a challenger that's like enthusiastic, but like pushes hard. And if for folks that are maybe more familiar with DISC, I'm like a DI, like a really like extreme DI right on the border between like dominance and influence. And so I like to move quickly. I like to talk about things, but I don't like to talk about things too much. Too much talk is annoying for me and frustrating. So I think that's like me at my core. I think when I'm, in periods of stress, I've probably become more of a commanding style of leadership, which I don't love, to be honest. Like I don't like that side of myself, but that's sort of where I go when I'm stressed. I become much more directive around like what I need people to do. And I think that's something that I need to work on because I don't think commanding is necessarily bad, but there's like a way to go about it that works, and there's a way to go about it that maybe doesn't always work. I'd say in general, though, when I'm on top of myself, when I am not, super stressed, I'd say my style is probably more democratic as a leader. And I really like to do coaching with my leaders that are under me. I was really fortunate, 5 or so years ago to get an executive coach, and I've had one ever since then. And that really helped me kind of like get out of the mentality. And I think this is important for anyone that moves up and becomes senior really quickly, is it's really tough to get out of like the doer mentality as opposed to like leader. And so coaching really helped there and helped me realize that like my job wasn't to solve my team's problems. My job was to help kind of create an environment whereby they could learn and they could handle their own problems themselves, because ultimately like I'll then become a bottleneck if I don't do that. I'd say today, though, I really try and adapt my leadership. So if for someone that's newer and more junior and needs more help, like I might be more directive with them, versus someone that's more experienced. I might just try and support them or just delegate work to them because I know that they know what they're doing. So I think I try and adapt between being direct, being a coach, being a supporter, or being a delegator. And I think I'm always trying to reevaluate based on the person's experience and their track record with doing the thing that I may be working with them on, what type of person I need to show up as. Again, though, it's like one of those things that I'm always learning and trying to get better at. So yeah, I'd be curious to see how that changes over time.
Well, I think you've already
What
talked
is your
about
leadership style, out of curiosity, Tricia?
what is my leadership style. I tend to be the sort of mentor coach leader. I definitely can be very definitive and, more in that sort of like dominant. I tend to talk probably too much, and then share my opinion, and because I tend to project it with a lot of confidence, it comes across that maybe I'm not as open in terms of hearing what
Yeah,
other
I
people's.
think I have the same situation
Yeah, but I
sometimes.
mean, but at the end of the day, I share my opinion on things in the hope that it'll direct conversation. So I probably need to, say a little bit less. And but my philosophy is I want to hire really strong people and coach them and break down walls and open up doors for them and use my time and energy to really help them build their success.
Yeah,
So I think the stronger you have a team, the more you can do, the more you empower your people, and that you spend your time to like coach those people to do well. I think, that's great.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there.
And I think the other thing is that I really believe in like fostering a sense of belonging and ownership where like everybody understands how they contribute to the bottom line of the company. It doesn't matter if you're the creative director, you understand how having a strong brand leads to the great experience, leads to more people, being able to understand what you do, and that helps the company grow, for example. And, when I got to Drift, everybody was in their silos, and I think it was also very hard for them to understand how they map to the bottom line, because the one team of demand gen was held accountable for pipeline, but then the other teams didn't directly contribute to pipeline.
Mm.
So that was a big thing for me, was to foster a collaborative environment across the teams, because I really believe by having that collaborative input, you're going to do better work.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
so that's been a big thing for me. But I think one of the things that, especially in today's day and age, that you have been recognized for is this commitment to mental health. So I guess it's not a leadership style. It's a little bit more like, what is the sort of philosophy of engaging with people? Can you talk a bit more about how this became a podium for you, and, how it kind of shows up at work, in like the outside of work, like just in terms of like the broader community outside of G2, I guess I mean.
Yeah.
And where does that come from, and like what has it meant for you in your career?
Yeah, sure. So I think the quick story on that is essentially that, I started G2 a little bit after my 29th birthday in the CMO role, and so I it was what was really interesting was that I was the happiest that I've ever been. I'd got my dream job. I got it by like the goal I wanted to get there. I wanted to get to the C-suite by 30, and then within about a month of getting the job, I just started to feel like, what's the word? I started to kind of just feel that itch that I had felt before that kept me like pushing and moving on up. And it kind of really made me reflect, because I was like, fuck, Ryan, like, what is wrong with you? Like, you've literally been working your whole life to get to this job at this age and with a company that you really admire. And you enjoyed it for like a month, and now you're like unhappy, and now you're thinking like, well, you need to be the CEO, or maybe you need to be a VC. And I kind of had this, I think I was really fortunate to like have that realization at a young age, because I looked around and I was like, okay, like I've ticked all the boxes that I want to tick, and like I'm not satisfied. Like this like isn't the way it's meant to be, or the way I thought it would be. And so it kind of like forced me to go down like a really deep and dark path really quickly of self-reflection. And so, funnily enough, my wife is a clinical psychologist, and naturally around this time, like I was starting to feel really depressed, because I had taken on this role. I think I felt the imposter syndrome of being young, being so much younger than all of the other senior leaders on the team. And then I had this immense weight on my shoulders that I think I had mainly put there myself to like drive impact really quickly, to prove to myself, to prove to the company that I was worthy. And so, long story short, I think I realized that like I was using my job and my career and my possessions and my success as like a way to feel self-esteem, for lack of self-esteem that I actually had at my core, from like a young kid and from being bullied when I was younger. And so, yeah, I was able to, I think essentially I had within maybe like this 12-month period, like I went from like being semi-suicidal, to be honest, to then being so much like through it. And I just felt so, I was really proud of where I'd gotten to, and I felt like I'd learned so much about myself, and I kind of wanted to just share that with people, I guess, essentially, and let them know that like, it's okay to like have these like feelings and to talk about them. And so step one for me was I literally just instead of like having my therapy sessions on my calendar as private, I just made them not private, right? That was like my step one of like coming out of like the mental health closet essentially, right? Which is crazy that that was a thing, because like no one's afraid to put like gym on their calendar or like Peloton or workout. That's like a badge of honor when you work on your body and your health. But like when you work on your mind, like you're ashamed of that, which is, it's totally fucked up. And so the more I talked about this and the more I thought about it, I realized that, I wanted to start sharing more publicly about it. And so I started sharing more. I did an op-ed for the World Health Organization, an op-ed for HBR, an op-ed with NBC, and a bunch of different publications that started reaching out as I started speaking. Because I think they liked the angle that it was like this executive talking about something that no one really talks about. And so that then I think over time helped me feel more connected with my team, actually, because they would start to come to me and say, hey Ryan, like I need to take a mental health day. Everything's okay, but I'm a bit burnt out. And I want you to know that like normally I would have never ever told a boss that I'm taking a mental health day. I just would have said I'm sick, but I feel like I can tell you that. And so I just started to feel this like deep connection with my employees, and started to feel like we all belong together and we were all facing similar challenges and similar demons. Like that's what it is to be human, I think. And so yeah, it kind of made me feel really, really connected. And then I think at that point in time, Glenn Close reached out, because she's obviously an actress, but then she founded an organization called Bring Change to Mind a decade or so ago, basically focused on fighting the stigma around mental health. Because I think she did a lot of research, and she ultimately saw that like there's really great resources for people when they raise their hand, when they say I need help, right? Like the suicide prevention hotline. There's so many amazing resources, therapy, but the statistics show that when someone has like a mental health onset of a condition, they typically don't raise their hand and ask for help for 10 years, which is insane. And that was kind of the case for me, right? Because I'd say like I probably had like mental health challenges from like the age of maybe 18. They weren't as pronounced by any means, and I was able to kind of not realize them by focusing on work and career and attainment. And it wasn't until maybe I was like 28 that I realized that I actually needed to like address some deeper things. And so I joined Bring Change to Mind, and that kind of also helped me have a bit more of a platform to start to share my thoughts here. And I speak really openly with the leaders at G2 and with leaders of other companies and consult on this because I'm really passionate about it. And for leaders that like maybe want to start to be more vulnerable, that want to be more open, I typically tell them just like start small, right? Like you can be vocal for your actions. You don't need to just like blurt everything that you're feeling out there immediately, and you can if you want to as well. And I think by doing that and by leadership showing that, we're not all perfect, because fuck God, no one's perfect, right? But, what you see on LinkedIn and on Instagram really maybe kind of distorts people's image so often. And, that's helped, I think, that's helped me, and that's helped a lot of leaders. And so it's just something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the end there, you bring up the point about how important it is to like really be transparent and accessible to your team, and how it's refreshing in a way when you can admit that you're not perfect, because we are surrounded so much by like the Instagram feed, the LinkedIn feed, like everything where it appears like everybody's perfect. And that's sort of like, I mean, I guess it's semi-purposeful that everybody puts their best thing. Like, most people don't put out there like, I'm having a mental health day today. Like, I just couldn't take it anymore, I mean, I respect some people, because I know a couple people who really use those platforms to then just raise their hand and say, hey, like the last 3 months have looked perfect, but let me tell you like really what's going on in my life. And I think it takes longer to do that, but I think it makes that person more human.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, every time that we talk, that there's like, it just like we have this connection, we just like talk, and it just becomes like this great conversation. It's interesting. Like you talk about how you put your time and energy into your work. And I had this experience kind of around the same time that you're talking about, actually, where I've always been very driven, and I always had this like ambition and go get it and build your career, and not as aggressive as you with like this idea to be a CMO by 30. And I definitely didn't make it to that level at that fast, but
I don't recommend anyone go down that path. I don't think I would do it again, to be honest.
but when I was 29, I had been doing Ironman. I had been like growing my career. I was, thinking about, I had been married, like all these things. And then all of a sudden I just like realized like I'm not happy in anything, and
Yeah.
it was a huge wake up for me. And I ended up getting divorced and really like sitting there and saying, holy crap, like I've been so focused on go for the next thing, go for the next thing, go for the next thing.
Mm.
I haven't really been focused on me and like, what do I need? And I didn't even know how to do that.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like, that was like the scariest time, because I'm like, oh my God, like since I was 10, I was like, oh, I have to like be the best in baseball. And then I have to do this. And then I have to learn how to do this so I can go to school for that. And then when I'm in school, I have to learn this so I can go be a career of that. And, just like this, like on and on and on and on.
Yeah. It's a few things, few thoughts. First, like what I love about just this little interaction, right? And this is why I try and share this with people is when you are vulnerable with someone else and you share a part of yourself that you don't typically share, people typically reciprocate. Like there's maybe like 1 in 20 people when I share my stories around mental health, do they then not reciprocate and share something vulnerable about them in the same way that you just did that about you, right? And that shows now people that they can respond, they can share stuff with you and then you'll share back with them. So I love that because I think that's just like a beautiful little microcosm of like what being vulnerable does for the people around you. And then to your point around kind of, what you went through, I think it's really tough, right? I vividly remember in high school when I was majoring in psychology, like learning about unconditional positive regard and how like, we need to like raise our kids to know that like, it's not about achievement. It's about like them just like being proud of who they are and like doing the best that they can. And I feel like somewhere along the way, that message doesn't ever seem to make it through to like when we start and in our careers. Um, and it's a tough one as well, because like, there's a part of me that thinks at times, like, I'm kind of glad that I didn't have this. I don't know if this is true, but I feel like sometimes I think to myself, gosh, like if I didn't become aware of my like issues a bit later in life, like when I was 29, like maybe I wouldn't have pushed as hard as I did. And I sometimes think about this. I'm like, gosh, like would I have changed it if I could have changed it? And I don't know if I would or wouldn't have. It definitely maybe would have changed my path and where I would have gone. And maybe I wouldn't have beaten myself up so much if I didn't feel like I was hitting those goals that I felt like I should be hitting. But at the same time, I got so much energy out of that feeling of being like someone with a chip on their shoulder, that person that needed to prove something to like the bullies from the past. And so it stoked a fire in me that was awesome, but then also kind of like burnt me inside a little bit. And so
Yeah.
it's been I think just even having vocabulary to like understand what I went through and to talk about that. And everyone has similar stories realistically, right? Whether they realize them or not. So yeah, it's fun.
Well, I think it's interesting because I know, every company does their review cycles and things like that. And we're in the midst of doing one of our review cycles. And one of the things that's coming up is this, the sense of empathy. And I think one of the things in my own career that the overall ambition to move forward, I think for me, it cut out a little bit of the ability to just be empathetic with the people around me. And I think in today's day and age, what's happening is we're starting to see so much more how like it's not a business buying from a business, it's humans that are doing the research on your site, listening to other humans. And it's just not, it's so much more important to think of like what is that human factor within everything, that that empathy comes out. Do you think that impacted sort of like what you've experienced now, sort of looking at the question and this incorporation of mental health into what you've been talking about in this platform? Has that changed the amount of empathy that you've had in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think it has. And something that I think as my like leadership has evolved over time, I remember once one of my original executive coach said to me, she was like, Ryan, you need to learn how to balance results and relationships. she said, it's like something that's like a really unique balance. And right now, like you are just like fucking so focused on results and like you are not thinking about relationships. And if you really want to build teams that they get motivated and inspired by you, you can't just focus on results. And essentially what I was realizing was like I was like beating myself up so much inside about results, and that was then kind of overflowing to my team, and that's like no way to motivate people, right? And so yeah, I think by learning like how to better balance, because I think people either over this, I think it's a rare human that can balance those two things perfectly, right? If I think back in my career, people that were like the over indexed in relationships used to really frustrate me. And I have vivid memories of speaking to like my bosses in the past where I'd be like, like, why don't we like work more on like this other leader? Like all they do is like talk about their team, but they're not driving results. Like, and it used to like really frustrate me at my core. And I didn't even realize that like I was like I was doing the same thing but in the other direction. And both aren't right, because if you kind of like over coddle your employees, they never learn actually like what they need to do to hit goals. On the flip side, if you like over focus on goals, they never really learn how to like develop their own interpersonal skills. And so I think I've gotten a lot better at balancing those two things. But I think for me, it's like, for me, I always need to remember to really lean into the relationship, because at my core, and I think this is maybe why we get along so well, you and I, is that like, I think you're really results driven too. And so I think I remember saying to my coach once, I was like, but what if I become too relationship oriented and I forget about results? And she was like, Ryan, results are in your fucking DNA. You're never going to forget that. So like, just focus on relationships. The results will happen. Like you can't change that about yourself, but you can kind of change how you think about connecting with others and not viewing everyone as like an adversary to you, you know? And I think that was something that I needed to learn. And look, maybe I'm like kind of deflecting responsibility here, but I think a big lesson for me was because I was always a regional leader. So, you know, I ran marketing for Salesforce in all of Asia Pacific. I did it for HubSpot. I did it for ExactTarget. I think I had this like deep down kind of like anger towards like the HQ team, because I don't know if you, I think, yeah, you, when you were doing marketing in
Yeah, when
Canada
I
for
was in Canada,
Salesforce,
like I
right?
experienced firsthand that.
Yeah, you never ever get anywhere near the support, anywhere near the budgets. No one knows what you're doing. And at the time, it used to frustrate me because I was like, gosh, like, look at our numbers. Like, we are crushing our numbers with so much like little money that our counterparts in Latin America and EMEA had. And so I kind of viewed EMEA and LATAM as like competitors, right? Like we were all kind of like the regional CMOs that reported into the global CMO. And I just like felt like we were dueling constantly. And maybe I was the only one, but like,
I
you
think
know,
that's a constant thing, because it is like, it's like the children all fighting to get attention from the parent, right?
totally. And I felt like I don't know which child in like a big family of three kids. Maybe it's the middle kid that gets like neglected the most. I felt like APAC was the little kid, was the middle kid. And so it kind of, that stoked a bit of like anger and frustration in me, which then I think kind of propelled me to focus more on results. And that ultimately allowed me to then assert why I should have been promoted faster. And because I was able to say, hey, boss, like, you know, these other two people that report to you, like they have bigger teams, they have more money, like they're not driving as much marketing source revenue as I am. Like, this feels totally unfair to me, right? Like if you're not going to pay me properly and give me the promotion and give me the same title as them, like I'm out. And I was really fortunate that me and my boss had a really strong relationship. And I think I probably hadn't advocated for myself so strongly in the past. And fortunately, I was able to lean on the data to show that. And so it worked out in the end. But yeah, I think that kind of, I then had, I think, a bit more of that mentality when I came to HQ and almost viewed like um, different functions in a business outside of marketing, maybe a little bit adversarial. And I think I had to really quickly realize that, whoa, Ryan, no, they're not. Like you all need to work together to really achieve the company's goals. And one of my bosses, the CMO at HubSpot, once taught me, he was like, hey, like you're like he said to me, my first team is the senior leadership team. So like he viewed his first team as like the core team with the CRO, with the CFO, with the chief legal officer, etc. And then marketing was his second team. And that was like a really good kind of reminder for me that like, actually my first team is the senior leadership team. And, you know, I need to prioritize like working with them over prioritizing working in my team, because that's when we do that, like we are now all together working on the business and we can take ownership of each other, as opposed to like being in silos and not really and not really kind of, being as maybe helping to each other.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think on the bookshelf behind me is The Advantage, which is from the Table Group, which is founded by Patrick Lencioni, which is
Yeah,
100% about the first team being the
love
leadership
that.
team, and then how that cascades down, and how I think the other thing we haven't talked about, and we don't need to go there, but is this concept of trust. And if you have that mentality of your first team being that leadership team, and you can build a trust across that team to really show the capability to work together, you can move faster. And then when you show that trust across the team, it just becomes a mental model for everyone below you to also
Yeah.
work across the teams, maybe even just across the teams of marketing, but also to realize like, oh, well, maybe the answer to this question is in the product org or in the
Hmm.
sales org or somewhere else. And to not always just sort of silo and feel like you're on your own.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things, and I feel like for sure, I don't know if you would say this, you spoke before about one of your superpowers, but I think this superpower of the vulnerability and, the ability for you to kind of connect even outside of G2 with this mental health as a platform seems like it's one of your superpowers because it really opens up doors, I would say. Are there any other superpowers you feel like you have that we haven't covered?
The vulnerability is a funny one because when you say that, like, I don't feel like I don't know if that's a full vulnerability yet. I think I am learning how to turn it on. Actually, that's the wrong way to put it. I think my vulnerability is typically always turned on, and sometimes when I'm under stress, it closes off. And I think I'm still learning how to like not lean into my 8 Enneagram type of challenger always, and actually learn how to, like, through authenticity and kindness, which are two key values at G2, like starting to like lean into those before kind of like fighting back. So I don't know. I just wanted to say that because I don't want to. I feel like I can't fully own that. That would be like me lying because I don't believe that I fully own that as a superpower just yet. I think I don't know. I think the superpower around building teams is one for me. I think being really direct and being really open and honest, even if it's not all. Again, when I'm open and honest, like it's just I'm always telling my story though, right? So I'm super direct with people, but I also try and like asterisk that like this is my story, like this is made up by me, so it could be wrong, but I'm always going to give it to you. And I think I'm really fortunate that like we have built a leadership team at G2 and my boss, whereby like we are fucking brutally honest with each other, and I think my skin is still kind of thickening. Like I'm a really sensitive guy deep down, and it's weird, like I can dish it out, but like fuck, it used to be hard for me to take criticism if I didn't think it was fair. And so I think I've had to learn that, but I've also just had to learn to like be really really direct with people. And I think, I don't know if you've read Kim Scott's book Radical Candor, and I think I've always been really direct, and I think what I've changed is now I'm only direct once I've built personal trust with the person, and so that they know that I trust and care about them. So I think that totally reframes the direct feedback because it's coming at them from a perspective of like love and like helping. I really want to help you and I care about you. And this isn't to hurt you and bring you down. This is to like build you up. And I don't think I had my mechanics right on that in the past. And I probably wasn't as good at doing that. So that's maybe the other piece of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good layer to layer on in terms of how to give constructive feedback, how that probably plays into the building of your teams and getting the results that you want, which all kind of play together in your sort of success model. I think that you've built across all these different companies. Is there one lesson that you think you really have learned along the way that you think is the most important lesson to share with the audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking a little bit about this. I think something that I learned really early on, and it's partly to do with being a regional marketer. I think is because I always felt like we weren't noticed and we didn't have as much budget and we didn't get as much airtime with things. I think I learned really early that like the best way to get like attention and visibility for your team and the best way to drive impact is to understand what are the biggest problems in the company right now and how can I go and solve them. So I have like really strong memories of like when I was at Salesforce, even at HubSpot, when our COO, the chief operating officer globally, would come out to the region, and I would them. I was always obsessed with learning, like, what is it that like keeps you up at nighttime? Like, what is it? And that would help me then better understand, like, okay, what levers can I pull as a marketing team in my world to try and address that problem for them? So, back at HubSpot, we were having a challenge with churn many years ago. And then I remember like taking that lesson from the COO and then working really closely with our customer success team in APAC to develop a lot of automations to help them get like more predictive insights into when a customer might be churning. And so I would say essentially like aligning yourself to like the most important parts of the business is a really, really good way to set yourself up for success and to drive impact and to ultimately be rewarded and to celebrate those rewards with your team, because that kind of really is what keeps the company afloat.
Yeah, I think it also is a great, thing to think about as a CMO, because I think, the CMO has a unique seat at the table to be able to look across the entire business, and marketing can, in some way, shape or form, I think, really impact the whole business. So if you know that, then you do actually have your hands in the things that can make a difference, whereas in other teams, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
So, well, this has been a great conversation. We're going to leave a lot for the editors to figure out what to use. Okay. So thank you for such a great conversation. It's really been enlightening. I think, you have so many different things that you've done to build your career. It's so impressive that you've been able to make it to your goal of being a CMO by age of 30.
Silly goal, but yeah.
I mean, I'm impressed that you even had that goal, because I think when I deal with most people, they don't really have their goal of what it is that they want to do in 3 to 5 years. I think the majority of people are in that place, and that's okay too. But I think both you and I have had very purposeful moves in our career, and that's the one thing that I advise people all the time. Think about what you're doing now. What are you learning in that? And then what are you going to get if you go to take something else?
And I've like made mistakes in my past where like I've made moves to companies and this is before like LinkedIn, like stuff that's not even on my LinkedIn, before Microsoft, where I'd made moves that like were purely based on monetary like incentives, like getting paid more. And I left really quickly after a few months because I didn't realize, like, I didn't do due diligence and understand the company. And so I'm really similar in that I really try and help my team understand that, like, it's not just about money, which I think sometimes early on in your career, like, feels like it's about that a lot more until you have maybe a higher baseline where you don't need to worry about that as much.
Yeah. So I think, you've grown your career. I'm sure people could ask you tons more questions about that. We didn't even get to dive into it. But where should people reach out to if they do want to have more questions? Is it LinkedIn? Do you monitor Twitter? Like, what's the best place to find you?
You know what? I think like LinkedIn, I've maxed out my followers or connections or something. So I like can't accept any more people there. So the best is probably like Instagram DM or Twitter, to be honest. Yeah. And my handle is just my name, Ryan Boninici.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ryan. And thank you to the listeners for joining us. We look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Thanks, Tricia.
Thanks.